All right. Today I brought on our new coach, Tyler Ramsey, to talk to us about the best way to approach an LGBTQX, which what was kind of shocking to Tyler and I is when we looked around Google, there's not like too much information out there on this specific type of a situation. So we wanted to kind of put something together to show you some of the main differences between a general breakup versus, just a general breakup, I guess, versus the LGBTQ breakup and some of the challenges that they face. We were kind of getting and talking a little bit before we started recording about what some of those differences are, and I actually think they're pretty major and they're game changing in how you need to approach getting your ex back if that's the approach that you want to take. But anyways, Tyler, how are you doing? Sorry for the long intro.
Yeah, no, I'm doing okay. How about you, Chris? Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, we're doing good. I know Tyler and Anna have been nonstop coaching for pretty much all of February here, and you guys are how's it going?
Yeah, it's been very busy. We've had a lot of clients, and also juggling my general surgery rotation as well at the same time has been very interesting. Have not gotten any sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, we were supposed to do this podcast yesterday, but Tyler was like, "Hey, do you mind if I like push it back a day? I haven't slept in 24 hours." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably a good idea."
Yeah, I could probably think a little bit better now.
Yeah. Yeah, sleep is amazing in how that occurs,
It really
but
is.
okay, so there's a lot of ways that we can approach this, but one of the things that the first thing that really came to your mind about the big differences between an LGBTQ type of a situation versus a general breakup situation was the fear of loss being greater for an LGBTQ relationship, but it comes later. And I
Yeah.
stole the rhyme from you because that's what you said. So
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting concept, and this is, like I said, I should preface everything with this is general patterns from what I've noticed, and so this, of course, this doesn't apply to every situation and but most of the time I feel like it does, and so really it kind of boils down to this: is that the fear of loss is greater later, but it's not usually seen at the beginning because of the casualties of sometimes around relationships. And I feel like you know this or the LGBT community sometimes can have more casual relationships, and so they kind of they're usually very good at being friends after a breakup and that kind of thing, but most of the time it takes a lot longer for them to go, oh, hey, well, that was a good relationship that I had. What happened? Why did it break up? And they kind of almost circle back. But most of the time it just ends and then they're okay for a while. And it's kind of what I told you earlier with, I feel like, of all the attachment styles, I feel like fearful avoidant is a bigger one in this community. So that usually the fear of loss, it heightens later instead of at the beginning of a breakup.
yeah, well, so the first thing that came to my mind when you told me about, the fear of loss coming later is this
Yeah.
does sound so I did all this research on avoidance and how to make avoidance miss you.
Mm-hmm.
And man, I'm telling you, you can go down into the rabbit hole and learn some really fascinating things. And one of the things that
Mm-hmm.
really fascinated me most about how avoidance view breakups is they almost have to feel like you have moved on completely before they
Yeah.
feel comfortable missing you or
Yep.
regretting their decision. And I'm wondering if
Mhm.
that's sort of happening here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely think that that's more in play with this, and so there are general X's that are their avoidance, and they too take longer to come back around. But essentially, what it does is that they have almost this like freeing sensation after the breakup, and it's like you don't want to like approach them to where they're emotional, just almost like an avoidant in what you
Okay.
said. And it's
Right.
that I really feel like that's why when you feel like you've moved on is when they more feel comfortable, coming back and talking about it. It's because the emotional component is now kind of been removed from that situation.
So pretty much like the standard thing that we tell everyone when they're first starting out going through a breakup is going into a no contact rule. And there's like these different
Yes.
time frames of no contact rules.
Hmm.
Now, we kind of recommend three different time frames: 21, 30, and 45 days. And I'm honest, like, we don't have a lot of content on LGBTQ out there. No one really does. So obviously, once data comes in, we'll be able to sort of harp on exactly the best time frame, so to speak, from actual data. But for example, we have those three time frames: 21 days, 30 days, 45 days. Do you think in a situation where fear of loss happens later, you should extend your no contact rule to be one of the longer periods of no contact just to start out with?
Yeah, so that's something that I feel like, more of a standard approach. I definitely think you need to be more on the 30 or 45 day no contact with them. Especially, but will any kind of like attachment style that has avoidance in it is technically, you want to stay more on that 30 or 45 days. And so I feel like that's more of a better recommendation on how to handle these situations.
So, in your estimation, is 45 days long enough for that fear of loss to kick in, or can it take longer sometimes?
So sometimes it can take longer, honestly. And so I've noticed that, a lot of the times, you try these no contacts and then you just leave them alone for a long time and they circle back. And so it's kind of interesting though, but I do think that 45 days is probably a more appropriate no
Okay.
contact time,
So,
just because they do typically lean more avoidant. However, the caveat to that is that the dating and kind of circling back to the beginning part of that question of like, why do they feel the fear of loss? Well, the reason why it is that way is because the dating pool is much smaller. So there's not nearly as many options, nearly as many people to pick from, and typically everyone knows everyone in this community by the end. That's
okay, so
dated.
they're all meeting and networking with, and sometimes dating
Yes.
around.
Yes.
Um, so to me, it seems that's already one big difference from the general strategy that
Yeah.
we teach, because
Hmm.
we give people an option based on their situation, of course, of periods of no contact. You're basically saying your standard no contact should be 45 days, and it might
Yeah.
actually have to be longer than that if you have like an extreme fearful avoidant ex.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. And so even the ones that lean more dismissive that I've seen, it's like, oh, okay, you're gonna have to really give them some time, because you have to remember, I feel like, with these kind of attachment styles, they avoid conflict and they avoid emotions altogether. So that's why I told you that I feel like a lot of the relationships can be more casual because they don't have that emotional component to them because they are afraid of it. That applies to other relationships as well, like fearful avoidant and dismissive avoidant, but it is just more prevalent in this community, I feel like, because that's how they've adapted from their attachment style from childhood.
Okay, so this is also kind of interesting. Let's say you go with a longer period of no contact. The next sort of rung on the ladder that we tend to tell people is to sort of engage in texting. Is there any like major differences in between the general strategy we recommend to, let's say, a man or a woman who are trying to get back together versus an LGBTQ couple trying to get back together when it comes to texting?
Yeah, so I feel like being way more casual, but also
So
being
when you say casual, is it you mean like less available?
yeah, so less available, but not emotional. So I know a lot of the things that we teach or traditionally are, you just don't want to go full-fledged emotion at the beginning. And that's kind of standard for any kind of texting phase that you're going to go through, but it's really important with them. And it also is very important to not skip value chain.
Okay.
I think
So
that is extremely important. Like you will really mess it up if you skip the value chain, because if you give them exactly what they want, they'll just discard.
Okay, so the next sort of, I guess the same principles also apply. Well,
Mhm.
okay, so this is kind of where it gets interesting to me. So the no contact rule, longer no contact. Texting,
Yep.
you want to be maybe a little less available than the
Yeah.
average breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get I mean, the whole point of the value ladder, value chain concept is that in each method of communication, you're building up value. So by the time you get to that phone call or the FaceTimes or the video chats or the Zoom calls or what have you, is it okay to open up a little bit, or do you still need to stay kind of playing hard to get?
So I always stay on the, you don't want to show all your cards. So you want to give it, you kind of want to show them very, very subtly. And so um I do think that you can open up. There are ways to open up though that do not allow you to be quite as vulnerable, but to test the waters. Those kind of text messages I think work a lot better, because a lot of the times I've noticed when you're more vulnerable, they can avoid.
Okay.
And then they won't tell you how they feel.
So
But
is
that's
it
more
is
of
it a
an avoidant
situation
personality too.
where you need to kind of like test them and see if they're going to dip their toe in the water first before you
Yes.
go in the water? Got it.
Yes.
That makes
I
a lot of
think that I
sense.
think you need to get a little confirmation about that before you kind of open yourself up, because that's why I said like skipping the value chain's big with this, and you don't want to.
Right. So I'm just going to go on a limb here and say that LGBTQ breakups are probably on average going to take longer to succeed in getting back together than the regular breakup that we tend to encounter.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. If you're wanting them back permanently, I'll
Right.
phrase that.
Yeah.
Because there are situations where I've seen that, the ex comes back and then 2 weeks later is like, I want you back. I want to talk about it, that kind of thing. They get back together. They don't work out the problems, and then it just breaks up again. And so, and that would go in our favor of the rules that we set for a no contact, of like, well, if they ask for me back and they want that kind of thing,
Right.
well, you're supposed to break no contact.
Right.
And so that's where it gets a little bit more tricky. But most of the time they're missing you because there's some like need that they want met, and they just enjoy the companionship, which is typical of all exes though.
Right. Okay.
hmm
And so what about the dating phase when you actually see them in person? How does that differ?
So I feel like in the dating thing, like when you kind of like, are you talking about like once you've met up and you've had some like
Yeah, so
interactions?
let's say everything has gone swimmingly. You've
Yeah.
gone through 45-day no contact. You've spent maybe a month texting back and forth. You're,
hmm
integrating that with phone calls, and your ex suggests meeting up for a cup of coffee or going out, let's pretend we're out of COVID now. So we,
Yes.
we can keep it really simple.
Uh-huh.
What are the rules there? Or is it much of a, a crossroads from what we normally recommend?
I do feel like it's pretty much the same from
Okay.
here on out once you get there. Like I said, like the as far as holding, I feel like, when you meet up, it's going to be pretty similar towards all of that. I mean, of course, you're going to do certain things. You're going to like, go out to eat. Well, if we're not talking about COVID or that kind of thing. But I think it's also important, though, that you do hold your ground on things such as like affection, sex, that kind of thing. I think that is where you really have to hold out, because
Yeah.
if you give that, that gives the casualty of the relationship back, and it then becomes a situationship again, instead of a here's the relationship.
All right. So yeah, Tyler had explained his terminology to me before. We explain exactly what you mean by situationship.
Okay, so I feel like situationship is the new term for our generation, honestly.
Okay.
And so
So
I
that's
feel like
like the millennial term for casual,
it's
basically.
it is and a lot of people find themselves, whether it's LGBT or just a regular hetero relationship, and so I feel like the casualty of the relationship's comfortable. So I feel like a situationship means this: it's like, a little bit greater version of a friends with benefits. So they're their companion, they are there for them, that it's basically all of the perks of the relationship, you know accept that, they don't have to make time for you if they don't want to, and they can discard you at any point. And
Okay.
so it's
That just
kind of
seems like a
like
raw
that.
deal. It seems like
It
a really
is.
crappy deal to me.
Well, and I don't think a lot of people are upfront about it, though. Like, it's not like something that's mutually agreed upon at the beginning. It's just like this conscious or unconscious thing going on in the
Yeah.
back of their head that they don't even know that's what's happening.
Well, what's interesting about it is, do you think a lot of these situationships occur because the two parties never effectively communicate what they want? Like maybe
Yeah.
one person wants it, the other person doesn't, but the other person's so afraid of losing that person that they
Yes.
allow it to happen.
Exactly. And that's exactly right. And that goes along with fearful avoidant attachment style. They're not very upfront about their own needs until it becomes so great that they get so irritated that it just blows up. And so that's how I feel like the cycle kind of occurs. And so not being upfront about your own needs is very essential in the in this kind of relationship, for sure. Also, though, I think that goes along with that, that basically the only difference between a situationship and a relationship, in my opinion, is commitment. You're committed
Okay.
to that person through thick and thin. You don't have a
So,
way out.
so it is basically like the heterosexual version of
Yeah.
friends with benefits, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. But you just see it more common, I feel
Okay.
like, in this kind of relationship. And so,
So,
but you kind of see it more in an avoidant attachment style.
So there's a lot already that I think is different about LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
situations. Specifically, like it's going to take longer, it's going to require a lot of discipline, a lot of
Yeah.
patience.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel, this is just my opinion, and I'm really curious to get your take on this. One thing I noticed with just like the average person that we coach, for example, they have a really hard time when they get to that in-person phase of withholding sex. I
Yes.
kind of like, so any type of physical touch or anything, they're just sort of like, okay, like this is going to be the thing that gets them to commit. And I
Yeah.
imagine the LGBTQ community has the same problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is
So
is
I
the is the
definitely think
thinking the
so.
same there though, for like a guy who's trying to get his ex-boyfriend back, for example? Is the
Mm-hmm.
thinking like, if I do this, this is going to make them realize that like they can commit to me, or
Yeah,
that's going to be what?
definitely.
Okay.
For sure. I think that goes through a lot of people's heads. And so that's something I feel like it's important not to do. And so, you have to be very cognizant of that, just for that reason, because I feel like, casualty is a big thing. It's not like non-emotional, they don't have to worry about it. It doesn't require like big emotional needs from somebody.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so the other thing that we really haven't talked about or touched on really
Hmm.
is the out or not concept.
Yeah, so that we could probably make a whole video just on that.
Well, let's see
So
if we can fill the rest of the time talking about that then.
yeah, well, and I also have another thing that I feel like is a very good thing to talk about as well, that we can talk about after this as well. And so um the being out versus not out is something that is not like, that's something that nothing is dealt with, in another kind of relationship. This is specific to this community. The only other kind of community I feel like this might apply to is like if two people are extremely religious and they're hiding
Mhm.
the relationship also.
We
So
see
people,
I've
yeah,
seen that a lot actually. You'll see that a
yeah,
lot in sort of the Middle Eastern culture,
yes,
like one
yep,
person's, so all right. How do
yeah.
you
So I feel
how do
like
you
that kind of
so this
applies.
is all right. So I'm really curious to hear, like, uh, first, just let's get your thoughts out on it, and then
Yeah.
I got questions about the out or not thing for
Yeah,
sure.
so I feel like this is a really controversial thing, but I'm going to try and make it as clear cut as possible. In my opinion, like, and especially me dating in this kind of community as well, it also, it's tough to navigate with this because you can really like someone, and they can be really compatible, and all that kind of thing, but this one thing can really derail the entire relationship and the ability to get them back. So it is a double whammy.
So you're talking in the terms of you're trying to date someone who is not out and you are
Yes.
out. And it's this
Yes.
huge gulf between the two.
It is. It can be a huge gulf depending upon where the other person is along in their journey. And I'll kind of elaborate on that. And that is, it takes a long time to get to a point of self-acceptance. And usually there's a lot of self-hatred from that person. And, they're very afraid, to be who they are. And, even though I do think they really care about somebody and that person, it does put a massive constraint on them, which causes significant amounts of anxiety, which can cause a lot of fights in a relationship just on the mere fact that a person is not out, because you're hiding from the world. And so who's going to see me, if I post on this social media, like what are people going to think, that kind of thing. Things that you couldn't do in a normal relationship now become a hardship just for that point. And so when getting an ex back specifically, I feel like that's important to think about. And if this person is not on a journey or close to doing that, I think it's time to close that door, as painful as that actually is, because it's always going to have those tumultuous things that go on in it.
So basically for you, that is the game changer. Like
Yes,
that
I
is
do.
a situation. Do you have any idea of why it is so difficult to deal with this kind of a gulf? Why it's impossible to bridge the gulf? Because I imagine a lot
Well,
of people who are in situations like this are going to think like, well, I'll be the one to get them to finally come out.
yeah. So a lot of people think that way. And so I do think that there are some situations where that does occur. We've had success stories in the group, but I do think that this is the rule that applies to that. If that person is on the cuff of coming out, of like, all right, I've self-accepted myself, I just need to find a time to do it. It's a little bit different than someone that is just now finding themselves.
Can I ask you a question about that though? Let's say someone is on the cusp. How do you know that how do you differentiate between someone saying that they're on the cusp of coming out versus saying it because they think that it's what you want to hear? So how do you know if it's authentic?
So that is kind of hard. That actually is and sometimes you don't know. And so that's why I feel like, if this is the situation the person's in, just going into a complete no contact is the best thing to do, because what it does is it really elicits the fear of loss, because now that becomes the confounding factor on why they broke up. And so they're like, well, I'm going to lose this person forever if I just don't own up to who I am.
Okay.
And so and sometimes you don't know when you are doing something like that, if that's what's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And that's when essentially that means that person is just not in a place yet to do it.
Okay. So the out or not thing is a huge topic with regards to whether, like, I think with regards to your overall chances of success, probably in this situation, it's going to be hard to have. All right. So this is actually kind of a different approach to taking it. Do you think the person being out or not has any impact on your success chances, or are you talking more of a perspective like, hey, if you do get this person back, you're going to be in that on again, off again.
Yes.
It's like you're going to break up again.
Yes, you probably are, if that there's no change or no commitment to change. And you have to be careful with, just the commitment to change. You can verbalize that you're going to commit to change, but doing it is a totally different thing. As far as success, so I'll leave it like this, is there's two components to it. I think that your overall chances of success are lower, but they're lower for a short amount of time. So like, let's say, you're saying chance of success within 3 to 6 months of this, I think are significantly lower. I think your chances of success, longer out are higher.
It's interesting.
because
it's the opposite with every other situation.
Yeah, I do. I think that there is a higher chance of success years down the road when that person actually does do that. And then they go, well, we had all these problems because, I just wasn't ready. And, the regret sets in. And the fear, they're balancing the fear of coming out versus the love of another person. And sometimes fear ends up winning out in the situation. But eventually, when that, comes off, only regret is there left.
It's interesting. Well, I can understand why people would be afraid to come out, because it feels like they're probably like they'll probably building it up like it'll blow their life up. And it probably, in some cases, it probably could. And in other cases, it's maybe an overblown fear that they have. But I can definitely see why that is such an impact on your overall sort of game plan. But you said that there was something else that you wanted to talk about after we got through.
So yeah, I mean, the out thing is a huge thing. And, I kind of like, I know that there are definitely some people that I know that, have gotten their ex back, after the 30 days, but I do feel like those people are more to a place of self-acceptance. They just needed that little push to set them over. But other than that, I don't think that is such a personal choice. And it actually will build resentment towards another person if they feel like they're doing it for the other person, which creates a whole nother set of problems trying to get an ex back or trying to rekindle a relationship.
So even if you do kind of play chicken with the no contact rule here, it could end up backfiring in a long-term perspective, because then that person is regretful or resentful about coming out, not because they wanted to, but because they felt this necessity to come out to get you back.
Yeah. Or even while in the relationship, if you played the hot and cold game where you got them back and then the pressure got added of, you need to come out, then the resentment might get built right there. I think there's a less of a chance of that happening if it breaking up, though. So
in other words, the perfect situation for an LGBTQ is if both members are out.
Yes, that's the point. That is the point of the whole entire thing, is like, you need both parties out to have a successful relationship. I really do not think it can be the overall chances of the success of the relationship and the ability to rekindle it are low.
Well,
without those two components.
I'm kind of curious about your take on this, and I haven't looked at the recent figures, but you can often see the divorce rates for like heterosexual couples, and then you get to the LGBTQ community, and it's off the charts. And do you think it's because of this reason? Like, there's this resentment?
Yeah. So you're saying that there's a higher chance of, or higher divorce rate with LGBT?
Yeah. Well, so I haven't looked at the most recent statistics. But when I last looked, it was like over 70% or something crazy like that. And I'm just kind of curious, why, from your perspective, do you think the resentment aspect, I think, could play a role, but there might be something else to it?
So I would argue, so I actually didn't know this statistic, but I can like formulate why that would be the case, though. I really actually think the case is because of the casualties of the relationships. There's more insecure attachment style, I think, in the community, and it's not their fault either. That's what I want to preface with too. It's most of the time, I think it's any insecure attachment style is done from some kind of trauma in their childhood. And I feel like this community experiences much more of it, from the aspects of coming out, being in situations where, they have emotional trauma for that reason. Like, their parents may not have accepted them, society may not have accepted them, friends may not, and it plays a huge role in how they're developed.
Complicated too, because if you think about it, like, all right, so like my house, right? I don't think we have any gay couples near, but I can guarantee you, if one moves in, everyone starts talking about it. And I imagine you're in this bubble with this person who you love more than anyone, but it's also kind of like, look at all these people throwing rocks at us. I imagine that has to take a toll too.
Yeah, you do. You fight self-acceptance. And that's why I told you it's very, very imperative that both parties are 100% secure in their own sexuality and they're out. or it will fall apart because the insecurity ends up infiltrating the relationship to begin with.
So
And
that's a
so,
super important thing.
yes, and that's why I feel like the divorce rate could be higher, is because there's unresolved security issues because of the insecure attachment styles. And that's due to the trauma induced probably earlier in their life, because of all the stuff they experience against society, they experiencing with, their parents or friend groups, or not being self-accepted and feeling different. That's the same thing with a fearful avoidant attachment style and dismissive. It's trauma induced that causes that. So that's why their relationships, I feel like, are more casual, because the commitment issue is scarier to them, because they've never truly tried to rely on other people in their life because of being so afraid of relying on them from being hurt. So that's why you have these situationships going on, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if you really think about it too, human beings are very tribal by nature,
Hmm.
So when you get into like these tribal groups of what's acceptable, well, like everyone knows there's this really what was it, just a few years ago, I think marriage got legalized around the country, didn't it?
Yeah, 2015. It has really not been that
So
long.
it's very new, and
Yeah.
you know it's very tribal. There's people
Yeah.
out there who are not okay with the LGBTQ community, period. And
Yeah.
so I imagine that has to take a toll. So that probably all goes into that out or not
Yeah.
concept, and it just sort of feeds
Exactly.
into and almost corrupts the relationship, and
It
it's
does.
not their fault.
Yeah.
It's just it's kind of like being racist for someone based on their hair color. That's kind
Hmm.
of the ridiculousness of the way some of the people in this world work. They're super
Yeah.
racist over things that people have no control over,
No.
So, all right. So what other big
Yeah.
things are we missing out on here?
So I do think that one is that also is actually pretty big to consider, is that I think I mentioned it earlier. We mentioned it before we got on the call, was um, that everyone kind of knows everyone in this community.
Mhm.
And I'll kind of elaborate. So the sphere of influence is very important because
Okay.
someone knows someone. So if you tell someone, someone else is going to know something, because everyone knows each other.
Okay. So
And
the grapevine
oh
works
yes.
way better than the
Oh,
average
it does.
grapevine. All
Yes.
right, so
It what
let's define what we mean by sphere of influence, because so this is on YouTube, this is on podcast. Some of these people aren't in our Facebook group or haven't done coaching. What's
mhm.
the sphere of influence, Tyler? So for
So
the
it's
newbies out there.
Yeah, so basically it's anyone in that person's life that makes substantial influence on their decisions. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. It could be a
Yeah,
friend, a family member, a significant other, an ex. I mean, Lord, it could be anything.
I've always looked at it like, okay, whose opinions does your ex care about the
Yeah.
most? Those are the most
Hmm.
important sphere of influence people around them.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, which is really interesting, it makes so much sense now that you've kind of prefaced it with the casualty of the community. The sphere of influence works way better than the average situation because of maybe the size of dating
Yes.
pool.
Yes. And so things get around much quicker in this, because, I always make a joke about this. It's kind of funny. It's like, if you go on your Instagram, if you ever want to figure out how to know somebody, you just go on your Instagram, and you'll probably have 10 or 15 mutual followers. That's what's hilarious about it. If you go
Okay.
get on an app and you're trying to like figure out who this is, you probably got 10 or 15 mutual friends with them. And so that's the running joke though in the community. And so but it's because of the limited dating pool, and also, the fact of meeting other people is usually done through more virtual things, such as, apps and stuff like that, because at the
Now,
same time
yeah.
you still don't know, like when you're out in a bar, you're not really sure who's who.
Well, in your opinion, what do you think is more effective? This is kind of coming off of this is just like dating in general. Do you think
Yeah.
meeting someone at a bar is better than meeting someone on Tinder, for example? Because I actually know the
Mm.
answer to this because I was researching it.
I'm sure you're gonna say that it's better to meet them at the bar,
No,
but no, is
actually,
it not really?
no. Yeah,
It's better to meet
Tinder,
them on
meeting
Tinder.
them on online is just as effective as everything else.
Yeah.
So it kind of gets a bad
You know,
rap.
I can believe that. Yeah, it does. I mean, I have friends that met on Tinder that are engaged at the moment, so I
That's
do know
cool.
that it works,
It
and
can work,
so
yeah.
it
It
can
can also
work.
blow up in your face massively, but that's
Yes, it
we'll
can.
positive today.
Yes, it definitely can.
So,
But like,
but
I
what
do
you're
think
saying is
that's
the LGBTQ community is mostly right now meeting through online. That's like the number one way that you're able to network within the community.
exactly. And so I feel like that's the easiest way to do it, unless you go to more of just a LGBT bar. And so to meet somebody, because I do think that there's still some people that are just kind of afraid, to just go into any random bar and, kind of like, shooting your shot at another person and
It can be
seeing what
scary.
happens.
For me, going up to girls and bars and doing that was like I'd be shaking and everything.
Yeah.
Uh,
Some people don't do that at all. So
yeah, life is quickly moved more towards the swipe left, swipe right,
yeah, it
which is kind of a
requires you to
weird
be
way.
less vulnerable, is what it
Yeah,
does.
that's true.
hmm And so it kind of teaches you not to be able to be quite as vulnerable as you should. And so, but no, that is something that's a big thing with is the sphere of influence. And so you do have to be careful about what you're doing, who you're seeing, what you're saying, because it will get down to the grapevine a lot faster, I think, with these kinds of relationships.
So it can be a weapon for you or it can be a weapon against you.
Yes, you do have
So
to. Yeah, it's just you have to be a lot more careful, I feel like, just because everyone does kind of know everyone.
so sphere of influence. So just to recap, fear of loss
Yeah.
is greater, but later.
Mhm.
Being out or not is really, really an important thing to consider, not only your success rate, but also the success rate if you potentially get this person back.
Mhm.
The LGBTQ community, because they network within and everyone knows everyone so much, this fear of influence is of vital importance. And also there's this concept of it's a little bit more casual. So there's a lot of trauma that goes into some of the casual decisions people make.
Mhm.
Um, Also, it seems like the number one attachment style for LGBTQ X's is going to be fearful avoidance.
Yes, I would definitely vouch for that. For sure, is fearful avoidant
Are
is.
we missing any huge components?
I think those are, really like the big ones that you can kind of unpack a little more, and but those are honestly like the really big things to consider when navigating a LGBTQX and
Okay.
a relationship in general. And so is to have these key components of, you know, you're gonna have more of the hot and coldness, like we've talked about in other videos. They're definitely going to be more hot and cold, and there's going to
So it'll be
be
swinging on the pendulum
they're going to be
with the
swinging on a
mixed
pendulum.
signals.
Yes. And so, and the casualty is something that is, I mean, and it's not, and like I said at the beginning, is like, this is not a hard and fast rule, but it is just a more common thing you deal with. And so, the casualty and, not being vulnerable and as emotional up front when you do start texting phase, because, that tends to scare people off, because what it does is it pushes commitment.
Yeah.
And so most of the time running from it is what a lot of them like to do. And so
That goes into that greater but later concept,
yeah, greater but
like
later. Yeah.
like being a little too emotional up front
Mhm.
can have the opposite effect than what you're looking for. It will just
Yeah.
usually make an X run away, which is
hmm
consistent with avoidant type of
Yeah,
personalities.
exactly. And honestly, to boil it down, you know, in a one-line sentence with an LGBT relationship is that you're going to be dealing with more of an avoidant attachment style. And those are the things you want to put in place with that. Overall, you know, I would feel like much higher dealing with that part. And so that's what you want to consider moving forward with that, on top of the sphere of influence that you're now having to deal with. That's probably the two biggest caveats.
That's super good to know.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of notes that I want to make here before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Number one is Tyler is going to be writing this massive guide for ex-boyfriend recovery on how to approach LGBTQ situations, kind of like the big alterations you'll need to make to the overall strategies that we teach for those of you. So stay tuned for that. And also, since avoidance seemed to be so important to grasp, like how they understand or how they work and looking at the world from their point of view, I recently did a video that really dives into this exactly, where we're looking at what makes avoidance miss you and kind of understanding their approaches. So I imagine there's a bit of a crossover there for anyone who's listening and wants to go a little bit further, because right now we don't have a lot of content yet on the LGBT community, but we will. It's something that we're going to make an effort to kind of build out and hopefully become the predominant authority on at least breakups when it comes to these type of situations. And I guess the next thing would be coaching with Tyler.
Yeah.
So we are doing coaching with Tyler and Anna, and it's really simple. You can just sign up if you want, but why don't you kind of explain to people what coaching with you is like?
Okay. So, you know, coaching, we do 1 hour sessions on Zoom, and basically it's just a one-on-one talk with me and you, and we just basically go through exactly what your situation is, you know, and get the details, and then build a game plan to approach your specific situation, and, you know, what your situation may have in it that, you know, changes the overall strategies or the general strategies that are taught from, you know, ex-boyfriend recovery, whether that be, you know, achieving success and getting them back, or, you know, moving on, or any of that. And so that's kind of how we approach the entire calls, learning exactly what's going on in your situation, and then you know, the last half we kind of figure out, you know, well, what do we need to do moving forward.
So if you want to sign up with Tyler, it's pretty easy. Just go to our website. We have 2 websites that you can currently sign up through: Ex-Boyfriend Recovery and Ex-Girlfriend Recovery, and just look for the coaching page. And I think we've got a few more spots open, so take advantage of that while you can. And real quick, before we end here, Tyler, I got one question I thought of while you were talking, and I'm like really kicking myself for not asking it. We were talking specifically. All right. So is there any difference between, because I noticed there's generally the strategies are the same, but the strategy between male and female when they're trying to get
I
their
knew that's what
exes,
you're getting ready to ask.
right?
I don't know why I thought that's what you were getting ready to ask.
Well, yeah. So what is there any big difference, or is it pretty applicable?
That's a pretty good question, actually. And so I think that it's probably more applicable across both genders, to be honest. And so I do feel like
there might be some subtle differences, but pretty much it's very similar to just like normal relationships in ex-boyfriend recovery, ex-girlfriend recovery, trying to get their heterosexual exes back. There are subtle differences, but the overall strategy doesn't change much. I would imagine maybe the same thing happens with the LGBT side of things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so, you know, I know we make this huge like generalization of, you know, guys are more avoidant and girls are more anxious. And so therefore they process a breakup faster than males might because of that dynamic. However, you do see differences in both all the time. And I have clients that are, you know, break that rule all the time, where, you know, you have a guy that's more anxious and you have a girl that's more avoidant. But in general, I do feel like across the board on both, you know, male and female LGBT relationships, or it basically applies with that more avoidant attachment style. And so I still do see, exceptions to that rule, but generally approaching either one, I feel like is, pretty similar.
Well, what's also interesting is you get really complicated with it because we're just talking about sexual preferences here. Like,
Yeah.
imagine like a LGBT situation with a long distance,
Oh, yeah.
like it kind of can get really complicated really fast, which is why it's
Hmm.
helpful to have someone sort of untangle the mess for you and kind of point you in the
Yes.
right direction. But we don't want you to think that Tyler or me or Anna are only just, Tyler specializes in pretty much every single situation. He's not just
For sure.
LGBTQ or attachments. He actually had a lot of success. I noticed in the Facebook group a couple weeks ago, one of his first clients was a pregnant girl, and she was already
Yeah.
getting some pretty positive results from the session. So it's
Yeah.
not like we're a one-trick pony. We are trained to kind of do more, but Tyler has probably got some of the most mind-blowing knowledge I've ever seen on the
Hmm.
LGBT side of things
Yeah.
with regards to the fear of loss greater, but later, out or not,
Hmm.
things like that, where, I'm just not going to have as good of information
Yeah.
as you will have. So
Well, I think it probably helps, that I have like personal, experience with it when, you probably don't
yeah,
identify with that
I'm like a
community.
blind man grasping in the dark for advice, which is why
Exactly.
Tyler is going to be writing the article, not me, so that you're getting it from exactly the authority who knows what he's talking about, as opposed to me, who would just literally be like, I don't know what I'm talking about, but this sounds like it might work.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so, I do think it always helps, when you've had to, I've had to navigate these situations myself. And so, I have personal experience as well. So I feel like that, that helps a lot.
Well, thanks for coming on, Tyler.
Yeah,
This is pretty awesome, actually. We're gonna have to do more LGBTQ type
for sure.
content to build up our inventory. So, because there is a pretty sizable amount of people coming to our websites that are looking for this, and there's just nothing there right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think we should also say this too is like, comment down in the comments below and, tell us what you want your questions answered to too, because sometimes we're not always thinking, and, it's always helpful to know what our audience is wanting the answers to.
Yeah. Also, like, we'll read it and we'll be like, oh, why didn't we say that on the,
Yeah.
it was so
Yeah.
obvious, but. All right. Well, comment
All right.
below, and we'll be back with more stuff later.
Sounds good.